Elena wiped down the same table for the third time that evening. Not because it was dirty, but because standing still in a restaurant like the Golden Oak meant someone would find something for her to do, and after 8 hours on her feet, she had learned that looking busy was sometimes the only way to catch a breath. The Golden Oak was not the kind of place where regular people ate dinner. It sat on the corner of one of Manhattan's most expensive streets, tucked between a jewelry store and a private art gallery. The chandeliers alone probably cost more than Elena would make in 10 years. The guests who walked through those heavy wooden doors wore watches that could pay off her rent for the next decade. They smelled like money. They moved like people who had never worried about a bill in their lives, and Elena served them. Night after night. Smile on her face. Feet aching. Heart heavy. She was 26 years old, and this was not where she had imagined herself at this age. Not even close. Growing up in a small town in New Jersey, Elena had been the girl with the gift. That's what everyone called it. A gift. By the time she was 5, she could play songs on the piano just by hearing them once. By 8, she was performing at local events. By 12, she had won her first national competition. Teachers said she had something special, something rare, the kind of talent that comes along once in a generation. Her mother, Rosa, worked 2 jobs to pay for her piano lessons. She cleaned houses during the day and worked at a laundromat at night. She never complained. Not once. Every time Elena sat down at the piano, her mother would stand in the doorway and listen with tears in her eyes. She used to say that Elena's music was the most beautiful sound in the world, that it made all the hard work worth it. When Elena was 17, she received a full scholarship to Juilliard. The day that letter arrived, her mother collapsed on the kitchen floor and cried for an hour straight. Happy tears. Proud tears. All those years of sacrifice had paid off. Her daughter was going to be somebody. Elena remembered walking through those halls on her first day. The tall ceilings. The sound of music floating from every room. Violins. Cellos. Voices. And pianos. So many pianos. She felt like she had finally found her place in the world. Like everything she had been through had led her to this exact moment. For 2 years, she thrived. Her professors said she was one of the most talented students they had ever seen. She performed at recitals. She won competitions. She dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. She dreamed of the day she could buy her mother a house and tell her she never had to work again. And then, everything changed. It started with a phone call. Her mother had fainted at work. At first, the doctors thought it was exhaustion. Rosa had been pushing herself too hard for too long. But then came the tests, and then came the results. Cancer. Stage 3. Elena still remembered sitting in that hospital room, holding her mother's hand, listening to the doctor explain the treatment options. Surgery. Chemotherapy. Radiation. Each word felt like a punch to the chest. And then came the part that broke her. The cost. Even with insurance, the bills would be massive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money they did not have. Money they would never have. Her mother told her to stay in school. Begged her, actually. She said she would figure it out. She said she didn't want Elena to throw away her future. But Elena knew the truth. There was no figuring it out. There was no magic solution. Her mother had given up everything for her. And now it was her turn. She dropped out of Juilliard 3 weeks later. The years that followed were a blur of hospitals and bills and exhaustion. Elena worked every job she could find. Retail. Cleaning. Waitressing. She picked up shifts wherever possible. She stopped playing piano. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't. Every time she sat down at a keyboard, she thought about everything she had lost. Everything she had given up. It was too painful. Eventually, her mother went into remission. The doctors called it a miracle. Rosa called it God's grace. But the damage was done. The bills had piled up. The debt was crushing, and Elena's dreams had faded into something distant and untouchable, like a memory from another lifetime. That was 3 years ago. Now, She worked at the Golden Oak, serving people who had more money than they knew what to do with. People who looked right through her like she wasn't even there. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the annual charity gala. The restaurant had been transformed. White flowers on every table, candles flickering in crystal holders, a red carpet at the entrance, and in the corner, near the window overlooking the city, sat a grand piano, black and shiny and beautiful. Elena had noticed it the moment she walked in for her shift. Her heart had skipped a beat. She had tried not to look at it, but her eyes kept drifting back. It was like seeing an old friend after years apart, someone you loved but had to leave behind. The piano was for the evening's entertainment. A professional musician had been hired to play during dinner. He was a thin man with gray hair and a bored expression. He played well enough, but there was no feeling in it. No soul, just notes in the right order. Elena caught herself thinking that she could do better. Then she pushed the thought away. That part of her life was over. She was a waitress now. That was her reality. The gala guests began arriving around 7. Men in expensive suits, women in designer gowns, diamonds and gold everywhere. Elena moved through the crowd with her tray. Invisible as always. She took orders. She poured wine. She smiled and nodded and said right away, more times than she could count. By 9 o'clock, the room was full. Laughter and conversation filled the air, mixing with the soft piano music in the background. Elena's feet were screaming. Her back ached. She glanced at the clock and counted the hours until her shift would end, and then she saw him. He walked in like he owned the place. Tall, expensive suit, hair slicked back. A group of people trailed behind him, hanging on his every word. The other waiters immediately straightened up. Even the manager rushed over to greet him personally. Elena didn't know who he was at first, but she could tell he was important. Or at least, he thought he was. There was something in the way he carried himself. A kind of arrogance that filled the room. He was seated at the best table in the restaurant, the one right next to the piano. His friends surrounded him, laughing too loud at jokes that probably weren't funny. Champagne bottles arrived at the table before he even ordered. Elena was assigned to serve them. She took a deep breath, picked up her notepad, and walked toward the table. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change her life forever. Elena approached the table with her best professional smile. She had served difficult customers before, rude ones, demanding ones. The kind who snapped their fingers instead of saying, "Excuse me." She had learned to let it roll off her back. A paycheck was a paycheck, but something about this man made her uncomfortable before he even opened his mouth. His name was Richard Thornton. She would learn this later. He was one of the richest men in the city. A tech billionaire who had made his fortune building software that millions of people used every day. Magazines wrote about him. News channels interviewed him. He had been on the cover of every major business publication at least twice. But none of that mattered to Elena in that moment. All she saw was a man surrounded by people who laughed a little too hard and agreed a little too quickly. The kind of people who stayed close to power because it made them feel important. She stopped at the edge of the table and pulled out her notepad. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Oak. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Richard didn't look at her. He was in the middle of telling a story to his friends. Something about a yacht and a trip to Monaco. His hands moved as he talked. A gold watch flashing under the chandelier light. The people around him nodded and smiled like they were watching the most fascinating thing in the world. Elena waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Finally, one of the women at the table glanced up. "We'll have 3 bottles of the Domaine Leroy," she said, barely making eye contact. "And keep them coming." Elena wrote it down. That was a $1,200 bottle of wine. 3 of them. Just to start. She nodded and turned to leave. "Hey." The voice was sharp. Elena stopped and turned back. Richard was looking at her now. Really looking. His eyes moved up and down like he was sizing her up. There was a small smile on his face, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse. "Yes, sir?" Elena kept her voice calm. "You forgot to ask if we wanted appetizers." I was going to come back after bringing your wine, sir. He leaned back in his chair and tilted his head. Were you? Or were you just trying to rush off? The table went quiet. His friends exchanged glances, amused. They could sense something entertaining was about to happen. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her composure. I apologize if it seemed that way. I'll be happy to take your full order now. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Forget it. Just bring the wine. And be quick about it. Elena walked away, her hands trembling slightly. She hated this. She hated the way people like him could make her feel small with just a few words. She hated that she needed this job too much to say what she really wanted to say. In the kitchen, she placed the wine order and leaned against the wall for a moment. One of the other waiters, a young guy named Diego, noticed her expression. Thornton's table? He asked. She nodded. Diego shook his head. That guy's a nightmare. Last time he was here, he made a waitress cry because his steak was too pink. Just stay out of his way and get through the night. Good advice. Elena took a breath and grabbed the wine bottles when they were ready. She could do this. A few more hours and she would be home. Back at the table, she poured the wine carefully, making sure not to spill a single drop. Richard was telling another story now, something about a deal he had closed that made him $10 million in a single afternoon. His friends gasped and clapped like he had just announced a cure for cancer. Elena finished pouring and stepped back. Are you ready to order your meals? Richard picked up his wine glass and took a long sip. Then, without warning, his hand slipped. The glass tipped over and red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, splashing onto Elena's shoes and the bottom of her uniform. The table gasped, but Richard just laughed. Oops, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Clumsy me. Elena stared at him. She knew it wasn't an accident. The way he had been holding the glass, the angle of his hand. He had done it on purpose. She was sure of it, but what could she say? He was a billionaire. She was a waitress. In this world, that meant he was right, and she was wrong. Always. I'll get something to clean that up, she said quietly. You do that. Richard was already turning back to his friends, chuckling. This is why you tip well, folks, so they don't spit in your food. The table erupted in laughter. Elena walked away, her face burning. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. She grabbed some towels from the back and returned to clean the mess. As she knelt beside the table, dabbing at the spilled wine, she could feel Richard watching her, enjoying it. You know, he said loudly, I always wonder about people like you. What happened? Bad choices? No education? Just not smart enough to make something of yourself? Elena's jaw tightened. She said nothing. I mean, no offense, he continued, clearly enjoying the attention from his friends. But if you had any real talent, you wouldn't be on your knees cleaning up wine at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. The words hit her like a slap. She stood up slowly, clutching the wet towels in her hands. Her heart was pounding. Every instinct told her to walk away, to keep her mouth shut, to protect her job, but something inside her was breaking. At that moment, the hired pianist finished his set and stood up from the piano bench. He announced he was taking a short break and walked toward the bar. The grand piano sat empty, gleaming under the soft lights. Richard noticed Elena's eyes flicker toward it. Just for a second. But he caught it. Wait a minute, he said, a new kind of amusement spreading across his face. You keep looking at that piano. Don't tell me you think you can play. Elena felt her stomach drop. She quickly looked away. No. I was just... No. Richard held up his hand, grinning now. I saw it. You were staring at it like it was a long-lost lover or something. He turned to his friends. Can you believe this? The waitress thinks she's a pianist. The table laughed. A few people from nearby tables turned to look, curious about the commotion. Elena's manager, a thin man in a dark suit, appeared at the edge of the scene. He shot her a look that said, Don't do anything stupid. She gave him a tiny nod. I don't play, she said to Richard, her voice flat. I was just looking. But Richard wasn't done. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $100 bill. He held it up between two fingers, waving it slowly like bait. Tell you what, he said. I'll give you this if you can play a single song without embarrassing yourself. Just one song. Any song. Think of it as a little bonus for your hard work tonight. The room had grown quieter now. People were watching. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do. The manager was shaking his head slightly, warning her to walk away. Richard leaned forward, his smile widening. Come on, sweetheart. Unless you're scared. Unless you know you can't actually play and you were just pretending to have dreams. His friends snickered. Someone whispered something, and another burst of laughter followed. Elena stood frozen. Her heart was racing. Her palms were sweating. Every voice in her head screamed at her to leave, to swallow her pride, to survive. But then she looked at the piano again, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. A spark. A flicker of the girl she used to be. The girl who had played on stages. The girl who had made her mother cry with joy. The girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. That girl wasn't dead. She had just been sleeping. Elena set down the wet towels. She untied her apron slowly, and without saying a word, she started walking toward the piano. The walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of Elena's life. It was only about 20 steps, but each one seemed to take forever. She could hear whispers spreading through the room like wildfire. She could feel every pair of eyes following her movement. What are you doing? The voice inside her head was screaming. You're going to lose your job. You're going to embarrass yourself in front of all these people. Turn around. Walk away. It's not too late. But her feet kept moving. Behind her, she heard Richard say something to his friends. They laughed. Someone said the word waitress in a mocking tone. Another person mentioned something about free entertainment. Elena blocked it out. She focused on the piano ahead of her, black and shiny and waiting. The manager rushed toward her, cutting her off halfway across the room. His face was red. His voice was a harsh whisper. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. Get back to work. Right now. Do you understand me? Right now. Elena looked at him. She had always been afraid of this man. He held her paycheck in his hands. He could fire her with a single word. And she needed this job. She needed it more than anything. But tonight, something had shifted inside her. Something had cracked open. I'm going to play one song, she said quietly. Just one. Then I'll come back to work. The manager's eyes went wide. You can't just... One song. She stepped around him and kept walking. She heard him mutter something under his breath, probably a threat about her employment status. But she didn't stop. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Up close. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. A Steinway grand. The kind of instrument she had dreamed about playing when she was a little girl. The kind her mother could never afford. She ran her fingers along the edge of the wood. It was smooth and cool to the touch. Memories flooded through her mind. Her first recital at age 7, wearing a dress her mother had sewn by hand. The standing ovation at her high school graduation performance. The day she received her Juilliard acceptance letter, and her mother had held her so tight she could barely breathe. And then the other memories. The hospital rooms. The beeping machines. Her mother's pale face against white pillows. The bills that piled up like mountains. The day she packed her things and left the school that was supposed to be her future. She had not touched a piano in 3 years. Not once. It hurt too much. Every key was a reminder of what she had lost. Every note was a wound that never healed. But tonight, for some reason, the pain felt different. It didn't feel like something to run from. It felt like something to run toward. Elena sat down on the bench. The room had gone almost completely silent now. The chatter and laughter had faded to whispers. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. At Richard's table, the billionaire leaned back in his chair with a smug grin on his face. He had his phone out, held up to record the moment. He was expecting a disaster. He was expecting to capture a struggling waitress making a fool of herself so he could show his friends later and laugh about it. Elena noticed the phone. She noticed the grin. She noticed the cruel amusement in his eyes. And in that moment, something clicked inside her. This wasn't about Richard Thornton. This wasn't about proving anything to him or to anyone else in this room. This was about her. This was about the girl who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much. The girl who had given up everything for her mother. The girl who had buried her dreams so deep she forgot they existed. This was about remembering who she was. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. They felt familiar. They felt like home. Her hands knew this shape, this position, this feeling. It was muscle memory. It was instinct. It was part of her soul. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched out. Someone in the crowd coughed. At Richard's table, one of his friends whispered something, and another snickered quietly. Elena didn't hear any of it. In her mind, she was somewhere else entirely. She was in her childhood living room, with the old upright piano her mother had bought at a garage sale. She was 7 years old, and her mother was standing in the doorway, listening with tears in her eyes. She was playing for the only audience that ever mattered. Her fingers began to move. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1-inch G minor floated into the air. Soft. Gentle. Like a question being asked in the darkness. The effect was immediate. The whispers stopped. The smirks faded. Across the room, heads turned. People who had been looking at their phones put them down. Conversations died mid-sentence. Elena kept playing. The music grew. What started as a quiet melody began to build, layer upon layer, like waves rising before a storm. Her fingers danced across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was filled with emotion. This was not the playing of an amateur. This was not someone who had learned a few songs for fun. This was the playing of a true artist. Someone who had trained for years. Someone who had been born with a gift. At Richard's table, the smug grin had disappeared from his face. His phone was still recording, but his hand had gone slack. He stared at Elena with his mouth slightly open, like he was seeing something he couldn't quite believe. His friends had stopped laughing. One of the women had put her hand over her heart. Another had tears forming in her eyes. Elena didn't notice any of it. She was lost in the music now. Lost in a world where nothing else existed except the sound of the piano and the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. She played the way she used to play at Juilliard. No, better than that. She played with something she had never had before. Pain. Real pain. The kind that comes from loss and sacrifice and years of silent suffering. And that pain transformed the music into something extraordinary. The ballade moved through its phases. The gentle opening gave way to moments of intensity and drama. There were passages that sounded like heartbreak. Others that sounded like hope. The music told a story without words. A story of struggle and love, and the human spirit refusing to give up. People in the restaurant had stopped eating. Forks rested on plates. Wine glasses sat untouched. Even the staff had paused their work to listen. The kitchen doors were cracked open, with cooks and dishwashers peering through to see what was happening. A woman near the front of the room was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She just sat there, letting the music wash over her. An older gentleman at a corner table had closed his eyes. His hand rested on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. He looked like he was remembering something. Someone, a moment from long ago that the music had somehow brought back to life. And still, Elena played. She moved through the most difficult passages without hesitation. Her fingers flew across the keys like they had a mind of their own. The Steinway responded to her touch like a living thing, producing sounds so rich and full that they seemed to fill every corner of the room. The music built toward its climax. The notes came faster now, more urgent, more powerful. Elena's whole body was moving with the rhythm, swaying slightly, pouring every ounce of herself into the instrument. And then, Finally, the last section. The final crescendo. The moment where everything came together in one glorious, heartbreaking conclusion. Elena played like her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. The final note hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Elena's fingers rested on the keys, trembling slightly. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. She had given everything she had to that performance. Every drop of emotion, every buried memory, every piece of her broken heart. And now it was over. She kept her eyes closed, afraid to open them, afraid to face the room, afraid to see the reaction. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing. Maybe she was still standing at Richard's table, wiping up spilled wine. Maybe none of this was real. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. It was the longest silence of her life. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was slow at first. Just one pair of hands. Then another joined. And another. Elena opened her eyes. The room had transformed. People were rising from their seats. One by one, like a wave moving through the crowd. The clapping grew louder. Faster. More urgent. Someone let out a cheer. Another person whistled. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding with a kind of energy Elena had never experienced before. She sat frozen on the piano bench, unable to move. This couldn't be happening. These were the same people who had ignored her all night, the same people who had looked right through her like she was invisible. Now they were standing, clapping. Some of them were crying. A woman in the front row was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, her mascara running down her cheeks. The older gentleman who had closed his eyes during the performance was nodding slowly, clapping with a kind of reverence usually reserved for concert halls. Even the staff members who had been watching from the kitchen doors were applauding, their faces lit up with amazement. Elena felt tears forming in her own eyes. She blinked them back, but it was no use. They spilled down her cheeks, warm and unstoppable. 3 years of pain, 3 years of silence, 3 years of pretending she was fine when she was breaking inside. All of it came pouring out in that moment. She had forgotten what this felt like. To be seen, to be heard, to share her gift with the world, and have the world respond with love. She had forgotten she was capable of making people feel something. The applause continued for what felt like forever. People weren't stopping. They weren't sitting down. They just kept clapping, kept cheering, kept looking at her with expressions of wonder and disbelief. Finally, slowly, Elena stood up from the piano bench. Her legs were shaking. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She had never been good at receiving praise. Even at Juilliard, after her best performances, she would rush off stage as quickly as possible. But there was nowhere to rush to now. She was standing in the middle of a restaurant, wearing a wine-stained uniform, surrounded by people who had just witnessed something they would never forget. She gave a small bow, awkward, humble, nothing like the confident bows she used to practice in the mirror as a teenager. The applause finally began to fade. People started sitting back down. But the energy in the room had completely changed. The air felt different. Lighter somehow, like something magical had happened and everyone knew it. At Richard's table, the billionaire sat motionless. His phone was still in his hand, but the screen had gone dark. He hadn't moved since the first notes had filled the room. His friends were whispering to each other, shooting glances between him and Elena, unsure of what to say. The smug expression was gone. The cruel amusement had vanished. In its place was something else. Something that looked almost like shame. Elena didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. She was about to walk back toward the kitchen, back to her life as a waitress, when a voice stopped her. "Excuse me." Elena turned. A woman was approaching her from one of the tables near the window. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a simple black dress, but there was something about her presence that commanded attention. The way she walked, the way she held herself. This was someone important. "That was extraordinary," the woman said. Her voice was calm but filled with genuine emotion. "Truly extraordinary." Elena didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she managed. The woman studied her for a moment, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. "You trained at Juilliard, didn't you?" Elena's heart skipped. "How did you know?" "I've been in the music industry for over 30 years. I know talent when I hear it. And I know that kind of playing doesn't come from nowhere." The woman paused. "I'm Vivian Chen. I'm a music producer." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She knew that name. Everyone in the classical music world knew that name. Vivian Chen had launched the careers of some of the most famous pianists of the last 2 decades. She had connections to every major concert hall, every record label, every orchestra, and she was standing here, in the Golden Oak, talking to a waitress. "I don't understand," Elena said softly. "You're here for the charity gala?" Vivian nodded. "I almost didn't come tonight. Long week. Tired. But something told me I should." She smiled slightly. "Now I know why." Elena's mind was spinning. This didn't feel real. None of it felt real. "Tell me," Vivian continued, "why did you stop playing?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had just brought a room full of strangers to their feet. The same hands that had been carrying plates and pouring wine for 3 years. "My mother got sick," she said quietly. "I had to drop out of school. Take care of her. Pay the bills." She swallowed hard. "I didn't have time for music anymore." Vivian nodded slowly. There was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. "And your mother? Is she okay now?" "She's in remission. She's doing well." "Good." Vivian reached into her small purse and pulled out a business card. She held it out to Elena. "I want you to call me. Tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow." Elena stared at the card. It was simple. White with black lettering. Just a name, a title, and a phone number. But it felt like the most valuable thing she had ever held. "I'm not promising anything," Vivian said. "But I think you have something special. Something the world needs to hear. And I'd like to help you share it." Elena took the card with trembling fingers. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll call." "I'll call." Vivian smiled. A real smile. Warm and genuine. "Good. Now, I'm going to go back to my table and pretend I'm interested in this gala, but I'll be waiting for that call." She turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing alone in the middle of the restaurant, holding a business card that felt like a ticket to another life. Around her, the normal sounds of the gala were returning. Conversation. Laughter. The clinking of glasses. But everything sounded different now. Everything felt different. Elena looked at the card one more time. Then she looked at the piano. Then at the room full of people who had given her a standing ovation. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and took a deep breath. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. But the night wasn't over yet. Because at that moment, she heard footsteps approaching from behind her. Heavy. Deliberate. And when she turned around, she found herself face to face with Richard Thornton. He was still holding the $100 bill in his hand. Richard Thornton stood in front of Elena, looking like a man who had just been punched in the stomach. The arrogance that had filled him earlier in the evening was gone. His shoulders were slightly hunched. His eyes couldn't quite meet hers. He held out the $100 bill. "Here," he said. His voice was different now, quieter, almost awkward. "You earned it." Elena looked at the money. $100. A few hours ago, that would have meant something to her. It would have helped with groceries. Maybe a small bill. It would have made her feel like the night wasn't a complete waste. But now, standing there with Vivian Chen's business card in her pocket and the sound of applause still ringing in her ears, that $100 meant nothing. She looked at Richard. Really looked at him. For the first time all night, she didn't see a billionaire. She didn't see a powerful man who could destroy her with a single word. She saw a person. A flawed, insecure person who put others down to make himself feel bigger. And she felt something unexpected. Not anger, not hatred. something closer to pity. "Keep your money, Mr. Thornton," she said calmly. "I wasn't playing for you." Richard blinked. He wasn't used to being refused. He wasn't used to people saying no to him. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to do. "Look, I was just—" He paused, searching for words. "It was just a joke earlier. I didn't mean anything by it." Elena shook her head slowly. "It wasn't a joke to me." The words hung in the air between them. Simple, direct, true. Richard opened his mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. Around them, people were watching. His friends at the table were pretending to look at their phones, but Elena knew they were listening. Everyone was listening. "You asked me earlier what happened to me," Elena continued. "Why, I'm on my knees cleaning up wine, instead of doing something with my life." She paused. "You want to know the truth? I gave up my dreams to save my mother's life. I dropped out of the best music school in the country so I could pay for her cancer treatments. I've worked double shifts for 3 years, barely sleeping, barely eating, just to keep her alive." Richard's face had gone pale. "So no, Mr. Thornton. I'm not here because I made bad choices. I'm not here because I'm not smart enough. I'm here because I love someone more than I love myself." Elena took a breath. "And I would make the same choice again, every single time." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood there, frozen, the $100 bill still in his hand. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he lowered his hand. He put the money back in his pocket, and then he did something Elena never expected. He nodded. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. An acknowledgement, a recognition that he had been wrong. "I hope things work out for you," he said quietly, and then he turned and walked back to his table. Elena watched him go. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel satisfied. She just felt tired, and relieved, and ready to start the next chapter of her life. The manager appeared beside her. His face was unreadable. Elena braced herself for the worst. She had disobeyed him. She had made a scene. She had probably just ended her career at the Golden Oak, but instead of yelling at her, he just stood there for a moment, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Your shift is over," he said finally. "Go home, get some rest." Elena blinked. "Am I fired?" The manager hesitated. Then he shook his head. "No. You're not fired." He paused. That was really something. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had ever received from him. Elena untied her apron and set it down on an empty table. She walked toward the back to collect her things, passing by Diego on the way. He was grinning from ear to ear. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," he whispered. "You're a legend. An actual legend." Elena couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Diego. Seriously, if you ever need anything, I've got your back. Forever." She laughed softly. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to feel light again. She grabbed her coat and her bag from the break room and walked out the back door into the cool night air. The city was alive around her. Cars honking, people talking, the distant sound of music from a bar down the street. But Elena barely noticed any of it. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened her contacts and dialed a number she knew by heart. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Elena? Is everything okay? It's late." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes again. Happy tears this time. "Mom, I played tonight." There was silence on the other end. Then a soft gasp. "You played? The piano?" "Yes," Elena's voice cracked. "For the first time in 3 years, I played." She could hear her mother crying now. Not sad crying. The good kind. The kind Elena remembered from when she was a little girl, playing in their tiny living room. "Oh, my baby," her mother whispered. "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud." They talked for an hour that night. Elena told her everything: the rude billionaire, the challenge, the standing ovation, the music producer, all of it. And her mother listened, laughing and crying and asking questions. By the time they hung up, Elena felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. A weight she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. She called Vivian Chen the next morning. True to her word, Vivian answered on the first ring. They talked for 2 hours. About Elena's training, her goals, her dreams, what she wanted for her future. 3 weeks later, Elena performed at a small showcase in Brooklyn. 50 people in the audience. Nothing fancy. But Vivian was there. And so was her mother. Sitting in the front row, crying happy tears just like she used to. 2 months after that, Elena was offered a recording contract. 6 months after that, she performed at Carnegie Hall. The night of her Carnegie Hall debut, Elena stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at the sold-out crowd. 2,000 people, all there to hear her play. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream. Her mother was in the front row again. She had beaten cancer. She had survived. And now, she was about to watch her daughter perform on one of the most famous stages in the world. Elena thought about everything that had led to this moment: the sacrifice, the pain, the years of silence, the rude billionaire who had tried to humiliate her, the night she had decided to stop hiding and start living again. She thought about the girl she used to be, and the woman she had become. A stagehand tapped her on the shoulder. "You're on." Elena took a deep breath. She smoothed down her dress. She walked out onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. 2,000 people on their feet, welcoming her before she had even played a single note. She sat down at the piano. A beautiful Steinway, just like the one at the Golden Oak. She placed her fingers on the keys, and in the front row, her mother was already crying. Elena smiled. Then she began to play. And somewhere out there, watching the live stream from his penthouse apartment, Richard Thornton finally understood something important. Some people can be knocked down 100 times and still get back up. Some people carry more strength in their hearts than others will ever know. And some gifts are too powerful to stay hidden forever. No matter how hard the world tries to bury them,